Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there, and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 397. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about souks and craftsmen and photography as we go to Morocco.
One more cathedral, I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into this week's interview, I do have three news stories for you. I'm not a huge fan of Bitcoin, but it's sure getting popular, and one kiosk in London lets you change your unused euro coins into Bitcoin, that is, into an electronic currency. An interesting idea. We'll see if it catches on. A little more practical, or at least a little more interesting, places in London are starting to label staircases and things like that with how many calories you would burn by taking the stairs. So they're putting smart labels on the real world. I like this idea. Our third news story is a less than ideal situation. A Boeing 747 jumbo jet mistakenly landed at the wrong airport in Kansas. They were heading for McDonnell Air Force Base, and they landed 8 miles north at a small airport that had a runway much shorter than the ideal for an aircraft that size. It did seem like they were going to be able to turn the aircraft around and get it back up in the air, but one thought was they had just donated the plane to the city. For links to all three of those stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome back to the show Ralph Velasco, travel photographer from ralphvelasco.com. Ralph, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Chris. Nice to be here.
And I say welcome back to the show. We decided 4 shows with Ralph, one on travel photography, one on Copper Canyon in Mexico, one on Montenegro, and another one on Toledo and Segovia in Spain. And where are we going this time, Ralph?
This time we're heading to Morocco, 2 of my favorite cities in Morocco. One is called Chefchaouen, and the other is Essaouira.
And I have to admit, I've never been to Morocco, but I've never heard of either one. So can you put them on a map for us?
Chefchaouen is in the northern part of the country, just south of Spain, near Tangier. Mm-hmm. And Essaouira is sort of in the middle part of the country on the Atlantic coast and several hours south of Casablanca.
Okay. And how did you get there in the first place? I mean, why, of all the places in Morocco there, and why Morocco in the first place?
Well, I was asked to lead a photo tour there this past April, and we hit probably 8 or 10 different locations throughout the country. We kind of did a circuit. And of those 8 or 10 locations, I'd be honest with you, I hadn't heard of Chefchaouen or Essaouira before this trip either. But as I was doing my research, started looking into them. And certainly after I was able to experience these places, I just fell in love with them because they were so exotic and interesting and just like stepping back in time. And I can certainly tell you more about each one individually.
Okay. And who did you lead this tour for? I'm curious.
It was another tour company. I have my own photo tour company,
right,
but I was asked to do this for a company called Strabo Tours.
Okay. And for those of you who've been listeners of Amateur Traveler for a long time, you may also recognize that Ralph and I did the one and only Amateur Traveler tour, the photography tour to Egypt together. And we were just saying our timing could not have been any better for that since all that has gone on there. So let's talk about Morocco, though. What would you recommend we do and see in those cities?
Why don't we start out in Chefchaouen,
Okay.
which again is in the northern part of the country. Morocco in general has a very French influence, but it's interesting that in Chefchaouen there's certainly a Spanish influence as well because it's very close to southern Spain.
Close enough to do a day trip even.
Yeah, for sure. And so a lot of people speak Spanish there. So many people speak French throughout Morocco, but in the northern part, many do speak Spanish as well, which comes in handy for me because I do speak Spanish and I don't speak French. But what I really loved about Chefchaouen is it was like stepping back in time. It's this wonderful sort of town that's built in between two mountains, sort of butted up against up in this valley. The houses are all painted in varying shades of blue and lavender, so very colorful. Walking down the streets, which there is no traffic, so it's a pedestrian-only town for the most part. There are parts of it that are accessible by car. But what surprised me about it is how hilly it was and how you need to negotiate quite a few stairs. So if any of the listeners have trouble walking, it's probably not recommended, although we had a couple of people on our trip that had a little bit of difficulty walking, and there was parts of the town that they could absolutely access, but then there was quite a few stairs down sort of into these labyrinthine streets. But a great, great town to just explore and get lost in.
Now, my impression is, and tell me if I'm wrong, if you go to Marrakech, I know that you will know that it is a tourist town, for instance, or Fez. Is this a town that gets a lot of tourism?
I think it does get a lot of tourism, but it's fairly a large amount of Moroccans touring their own country. I don't remember seeing too many, if any, other U.S. tourists. There are some European tourists because it is so convenient for them to get down there. Mm-hmm. But I did not feel like it was a tourist town at all because it's, I guess, somewhat off the beaten track as most people haven't heard of it, but didn't find it touristy at all.
Well, and clearly, since we're talking to you, part of the attraction of both towns are going to be they're picturesque, and I mean that very literally, that you're going to go and take pictures of them. Are there other attractions in the towns that you had a chance to take advantage of, cultural things, museums, anything along those lines as well?
There probably are some small museums, and I'm not much of a museum person anymore, but these are towns that I felt that I could easily fill my time with just getting lost in the back streets, sitting down, having some mint tea, walking into the local bakery where they have these community bakeries where people will bring the raw dough, and then for a small fee, the bakery will bake it for them and they pick it up later. So that's kind of a neat thing. I love to just knock on doors or peek in windows and look for local artisans doing what they do. In Essaouira, we happen to be walking through some of the back streets there. Both are walled cities. And in Essaouira, we were walking in one of the back streets, and we happened upon a gentleman who was repainting all the frames, the window frames for this, I believe it was a hotel. And he was making some really detailed painting on these frames. And so I love to pop in on local artisans like that, instrument makers, people crafting cheese or whatever it is. I just love to watch people do what they do well.
And I noticed from the pictures that you sent that there seemed to be a fair amount of crafts work in both cities.
I think I noticed a little bit more in Essaouira just because we happened upon this gentleman it was just so interesting. He had this little, very dark workshop, but he had the door open, so there was some nice natural light in there. In Essaouira, there were some great little shops selling pigments and dyes. There's people that make handcrafted lamps and lamp shades and things like that. So really interesting and wonderful to photograph.
Excellent. Now, was this your first trip to Morocco?
It was. And usually I will scout out a location before.
Right, I know you do that.
Yeah, before I bring a group there. But as I mentioned, I was asked by this photo tour company to lead this tour kind of at the last minute, maybe 3-4 months in advance. So there wasn't going to be time to scout it out. I did get down there a little bit early and was able to scout out a few of the locations. But for the most part, I was experiencing these places right alongside the participants that were with me. So, and that can be good too, because I think my tour participants like to see how I see and how I would approach photographing a new place. So I think that comes in handy as well.
And what surprised you about Morocco? You've been to northern Africa before. You've been to Muslim countries before. But what was different about Morocco?
I think what really surprised me is it did have that Muslim influence. You see the locals walking around in the jalabas and these incredible markets in Fez and Marrakech. But what really surprised me is, I guess, the European influence.
Okay.
There's such a European influence there. And I'm not a big history buff like you are, but it was overseen by the French for a long time. And so and like I said, in the northern part, there's that Spanish influence. Certainly there's the Moorish influence in Spain. So there's this cultural exchange that I guess I hadn't anticipated, but that makes for a wonderful cuisine. The food was just phenomenal. They make these, they use these tagines, which are a local sort of cooking pot. And they sort of put everything in there, cook it for a while, it steams, and then you have this wonderful aromatic meal. The lemon chicken is just out of this world. So I think the cuisine, the fact that we had this amazing local guide, probably the best guide, and I've worked with some great guides around the world, but this man spoke 8 languages. His name is Ishmael. He had been leading tours with this company, Strabo Tours, for many, many years. And so he had it down. I mean, he knew everyone in every city. He was able to get us into the right places at the right time. Especially, it was nice that when people wanted to go shopping, he was able to take us to the local places that were reliable and trustworthy and weren't going to try to sell us a bill of goods, in a sense. So having that local guide and getting his experience and the background of these places and the history that he just knew so well, and his English was flawless.
And one of the questions that I usually save till the end, but I want to bring it up a little sooner, is in both these cities, you're standing in the prettiest spot. Where are you standing? What are you looking at?
In Chefchaouen, I would say on one of those back streets with these wonderful blue hued buildings that are whitewashed in this lavender and these doorways, very intricate doorways. I like to look for details, so I'm always looking for door knockers and handles and hinges and things like that. the patina, the paint that was peeling on many of them. But I would say just standing on the back streets there, and then in Essaouira, it's a working port. There's a big fishing industry there, and they've got these dozens and dozens of boats in the harbor there. And so there's these blue boats, and you can get some really nice shots of certainly the overall scene, but then some medium and detail shots. So I would say standing right there on the waterfront, looking at these boats, and it's known for having quite a bit of a breeze there. I think there's about 10 kilometers of beach there, but the water's fairly cold. So there's a lot of windsurfing and kite surfing and things like that because it is so windy. But it's not really the kind of place that I'd probably go swimming. And one thing I was going to mention, and you're being from California, you would appreciate, but going from Essaouira back up to Casablanca, which was our next stop, I was amazed at how similar the coast was to Southern California or Central California coast. It's just incredibly the same. And so kind of like on that part of the Pacific where I probably wouldn't go swimming, but I know some people do, it was kind of similar. The water's fairly cold. It's somewhat breezy, but just so much reminded me of the California coast. And living in Southern California, I could really appreciate that.
What kind of warning would you give? What kind of things, for instance, did your guide tell you to be aware of culturally, for instance?
Well, certainly the women had to be aware of what they wore inside the holy places that we went to, many of the mosques that we went into. So they, like many Muslim countries, being aware of covering shoulders, wearing longer dresses or pants, preferably no shorts. Men being aware of hats and what they're wearing as well, but certainly it's more of an issue with the women. That was something that he was very distinctive on and making sure that we were aware of because there was quite a few women on the trip. The people there, as far as photography goes, and I'm always talking about photography, but I was warned that the people were not interested in being photographed. And whenever I speak at events like the travel show and some of the places that I speak, I'm often asked about photographing people. And I say that it's a very cultural thing. So if you go to Cuba or Cambodia, well, Cuba specifically, the people are self-proclaimed hams. They love to be photographed. Cambodia, they're a little bit less outgoing, but they don't mind being photographed at all. And they're very photogenic. But in Morocco, the people are fairly shy, and it's a little bit of a challenge to get those people photographs. So it takes some talking to them and breaking the ice. And I had a woman, she's behind this sort of ironwork on her window of her home. And we were walking by, and I lifted up my camera because I didn't just want to sneak a shot of her. So I lifted up my camera with sort of a questioning look.
Right.
And of course, she knew what I was after. And she just kind of waved her finger at me, no. And our guide, Ishmael, said, he gave me a sign. He said, just wait a minute, just wait a minute. And so he started talking to her, and he's got the real gift of the gab. 2 minutes later, she had no problem with my taking some photographs of her, and she had just beautiful smile and in this interesting setting. So something to be aware of is just photographing people and not just sneaking shots when you can.
One of the things that I learned, I think probably in Tanzania, was just getting a better sense for the rhythm of a place. And I don't know if that makes any sense, but we went to one of the markets where a lot of tourists were interacting with the shopkeepers. And my first reaction was, boy, people are really pushy. And this isn't very comfortable. And I realized I was really rushing through. And if I slowed down and let people show me their wares and then nodded appreciatively, but then didn't buy anything, it really became a different place. And so it sounds like you running into the same sort of thing is you don't just use your normal schedule of, okay, we're going to put a camera in your place, but you kind of slow down a bit and find the rhythm of the destination.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. If you show interest in their wares, you're not just turning up your nose at things. And I know that sometimes people around the world can be pushy in certain places as far as the sales pitch goes. But if you show some interest and some genuine interest, because it's obvious if it's not, I think people will really warm up. And one of the men on my trip taught me something. And because we had talked about it at the beginning of the trip, how the people are not very open to being photographed. And he said one of the things that he does is he'll photograph their fruit or their souvenirs or whatever it is that they sell. He'll show them the picture, and then he'll say, boy, this would be a really nice shot if you were in it, because I love to have a person in this shot. And 99 times out of 100, they agreed to it.
Interesting.
And I thought that was just a great, subtle way of getting the shot.
I still think of when Ralph and I were in Egypt. We went to one of the markets, one of the street markets in one of the out-of-the-way places, furthest away that we got away from the big cities, which was one of my favorite times, I think, of all the things we did in Egypt, as amazing as the pyramids were and Luxor and those sort of things. But I remember having a shot of one of the vendors, and I didn't even realize at the time I'm taking a picture, and I wasn't interacting quite as much. And I came home and I looked at it, and he's giving me the thumbs up in the picture, and it was just one of those, okay, we were interacting there, and I missed the moment, I think.
Yeah, it happens.
What do you wish you had known before you went to Morocco?
I was there in April, and the weather was just outstanding. It was a great time of year to be there, probably in the 70s. Essaouira, which again is on the coast, and again, much like southern and the central coast, is fairly temperate. So probably gets down to 60 in the winter and as high as 80 in the summer, but not much higher. So it's a fairly temperate place. And even in the interior, I mean, we went into the desert just outside of a town called Skouda, and we did an overnight in the desert. We did a camel ride the next morning. And it was fairly cold. I mean, probably 50s, 60s there. As we all know, the desert does get very cold
at night, right?
But even during the daytime, it was probably 70 at the highest. I know most people do, but certainly do your research on the weather going to a place, and especially if you're going to a lot of different locations within a country. It might require you, I mean, it's all about layers, if you ask me. I was in Bhutan this summer and scouting a trip there, and it was considered the monsoon season. But because Bhutan is a landlocked country, it's not like the monsoon that I imagine, where it's just downpouring rain for months at a time. It was cloudy. It rained an hour here or there over the course of the trip. But then I'm going back in November, and it's supposed to be fairly chilly. So for me, anywhere, it's just all about layers.
Getting back to Morocco, you're in some different areas. When did you feel that it was the most familiar? When was it closest to home, and when was the least familiar? When was it the furthest from home?
The furthest from home would have to be probably in some of the eastern parts of the country, like Tangier, where there's a very Berber influence. And so you see these men walking around in the traditional outfits, and it's just like stepping back in time. And there's these wonderful oases. I always had pictured an oasis like in the cartoons, where there's one palm tree and a little patch of green. The truth is that in the desert, they could be 40 or 50 miles long and 10 or 15 miles wide. And there's agriculture and town. Of course, that's where towns pop up. So that was really interesting. And to me, that was like being the farthest away. Boy, I'm in Morocco. As far as being closest to home, boy, oh boy, that's a tough question, because it is such an exotic country. But I guess that I talked earlier about that European influence, and I feel fairly close to Europe. So I guess when I sensed that European influence, I still felt close to home, even though I'm from the U.S.
Now, I would think Casablanca, for instance, would have more European influence than some of the other cities you mentioned.
Well, Casablanca is sort of a town that most people just fly in and out of. There's a nice market there. The Medina, the old town, is very photogenic, so I really enjoyed photographing there. But there wasn't a whole lot more to it than that because it's a fairly modern city.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that it had too much of a European influence. I think that was more, again, up in the north where I felt the Spanish.
Okay.
And certainly when you hear people speaking French and you see the Moroccan people speaking French, that's kind of a neat experience.
One question I have to ask you about the goats.
Yes, we were coming from Marrakech to Essaouira, which it's about a 2-hour drive. And all of a sudden, we see these goats in a tree. And it had to be about the strangest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And there was 9 or 10 goats in this tree. And what they're doing is these are argan trees. And if people aren't aware of what argan is, it's a nut. And it's grown in these trees. So what happens is the goats climb up these trees and they eat the nuts. They process them. And then that is collected by these cooperatives of women who then do their own processing of the seeds. And they have women sitting there with stones in their hand, a nut in the other hand, cracking each individual nut on another stone. And they collect the interior nuts and they make all kinds of products out of them, from cosmetics and oils to consumables like argan butter and things like that, which I kind of stayed away from knowing where they came from.
And I was going to say, you said that very diplomatically. When you say the goats process the nuts, they go through the goat's interior intestinal tract is really what you're saying.
Exactly.
Okay. I think everybody got that, but I just wanted to make sure we were clear. Okay.
It's trying to be politically correct.
I understood. Excellent.
But yeah, that was just a sight to see, and we had to pull over and get some shots. Now, of course, there were some men there asking us for some coins to take the shots, but it was well worth every penny.
Yeah, I had seen pictures of them before, but I don't know that I would have offhand remembered that they were in Morocco. Before I get to my last 2 questions, Ralph, what else should we know before we get on a plane and head to Morocco?
On this trip, I was there for about 17 days, and we covered a large part of the country. We did a circuit starting in Casablanca to Rabat, which is the capital, up to Chefchaouen, and we sort of did a clockwise circuit of the country. The driving distances can be somewhat far in between, depending on where you're going from and to, so be prepared for that. But the varying landscapes and the people, the culture, the food, just be prepared for this sensory overload that is just amazing. So,
and you mentioned the food again. Besides the lemon chicken, anything else that we should order when we're in Morocco?
The goat.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah, there are a lot of vegetarian options, but there's a lot of meat on the menu. No one got sick. It was a very clean country. So everywhere I go, I try to make food a big part of the trip, because I think the food and photography are sort of the 2 things that you have to be aware of when you're in a place. And so you come home with some nice images, but also have some great experiences with the food as well.
Excellent. Last 2 questions. You know these are coming. Finish this sentence. You really know you're in Morocco when what?
Oh, when you're walking down the small little lane, some long stairs, and you've got these blue buildings on either side of you, kids playing in the street, the smell of fresh bread baking from some nearby bakery. And I see a lot of people walking around in the traditional jalabas. That's when you know you're in Morocco.
Excellent. And if you had to summarize Morocco in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Just get lost.
Excellent. Lost in the windy back streets of Morocco.
That's what I mean. Absolutely. Don't be afraid to do that. Anywhere in the world, I'm always just cautious and try to be aware of my surroundings and stuff. But never did anyone on the trip have any incidents at all. And a very safe country, very welcoming people. Highly, highly recommend it.
Excellent. And Ralph, where can people read more about your travels or potentially even book one of your upcoming trips to Bhutan or Cuba or someplace else fun?
Well, you can certainly reach me at ralphvelasco.com. I actually have a trip to Morocco coming up in April, from April 7th to the 21st. We're going to be doing pretty much the same itinerary that I did this past April. So if anyone has an interest in that, they can find it ralphvelasco.com, look for tours, and then there's information there on the Mystical Morocco tour that we're doing. And also I'm on Twitter at Ralph Velasco, Facebook. I've got a new Facebook business page at Ralph Velasco Cultural Tours. So would love it if people would visit that and give me a like.
Excellent. Thanks so much for coming back on the show and talking to us about Morocco.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Really great to be here again.
I didn't have a lot of community news this week, so we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler here. I'm on a Thanksgiving break down at my son's house, and I want to go spend more time with him. If you have any questions, feel free to send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com or leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. You can also join the Facebook community, facebook.com/amateurtraveler, or follow me on Twitter at Chris2X. And as always, thanks so much for listening.